chapter.
So let's begin.
But you won't see the beginning of the chapter.
Yes, new problems and new future.
Yeah. Is it going to take a picture?
No, that's a video.
Hmm?
Video.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well,
Doesn't matter.
we don't have to go over this again, do we?
I think we started over. That's okay.
Oh, you want me to read this again?
Yeah.
Oh.
Even you can explain to me this.
I doubt if I can, because I've already done it. It's like trying to waken someone who's pretending to sleep. I've already. All right.
Happy to.
New problems,
Yeah.
a new future, and a new world for the new science. Let's get up here. No new science has ever been introduced, but what it also introduced new problems, new ways of thinking about these and older problems, and new ways of solving all problems. The new science of semiotics is no different. In fact, the new semiotics promises to be more revolutionary than any new age of thinking that has ever gone before. This is because it is the first philosophy to concentrate on thinking about thinking and about the nature of thinking about inquiry and problem solving. Peirce hinted in this direction, but he concentrated on developing the new methodology. This is why he is known as the founder of the inquiry school of American philosophy. It will be hard to talk about this new future in much detail because semiotics has not yet introduced all of its new methodology. Now that's what you're going to have to do.
Yeah. Oh.
Nevertheless, I intend to use this chapter to make a start on doing just this.
Okay.
All right, I'm going to skip the new age of postmodernism, but go to Peirce's theory of semiotic inquiry. Peirce's philosophy of inquiry is built totally on his science of semiotics, as he so often claimed. In this section, I hope to help you understand why this must be so and why his philosophy of inquiry is so radically different from the Aristotelian and the phenomenological viewpoints. Aristotelian logic points outwardly from the mind through an open window, as it were. Your eyes are a window with no screen, and you see the world as it actually is. But Kant would object that it also requires knowledge of the Ding an sich, that is, penetration of the Kantian veil, as it were.
Oh, the Kantian veil.
Yeah. Phenomenological logic points inward from the mind, again through an open window directly to phenomenal feelings as actually experienced, and leads to phenomenological inquiry. But Peirce would object that it also ignores the inexpressibility of the first person, expression of the inexpressible, as it were. On the other hand, Peircean logic mediates between these two approaches. It points outwardly to an external world, not of real objects as they really are, but as they are represented by signs. And it points inwardly to our phenomenal world, again, not directly to phenomenal feelings as actually experienced, but as a representation of an internal world achieved by means of our cognition of signs. This leads to an integrated methodology for inquiry. Semiotic logic thus leads us to a new methodology, an integrated methodology for inquiry involving the unification of science and phenomenology, yielding an integrated and a unified approach to reality. So, let's start with bilateralism, or Peirce's theory of hylozoism. Hylozoism being the word that Aristotle coined to say that everything in the world is alive and
Yeah.
has an inside and an outside.
We talked about it last night.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So we'll start with a new way of thinking, a new way of knowing, a new way of understanding.
So what might be, what is the new problem? I mean, your concerns.
That's what we're going to talk about.
Okay.
Traditionally, there have been two ways of looking at the world. The older one is often credited to Socrates, although it was formalized and made into an explicit logic by Aristotle. Whitehead most improperly called it the Platonic and only true philosophy. It involves looking at the world from outside in. Aristotle called this hylozoism because it views every existing body as a living being. The newer view was created by Pearson, although even professional philosophers often associate James' name with the phenomenological viewpoint, and they call it the stream of consciousness. Husserl is often credited with founding the science of phenomenology, although Peirce actually began to investigate phenomenology as a science some half-century earlier, and he succeeded in developing its logic. This viewpoint involves looking at the world from inside out, but it is also called hylozoism because, like Aristotle, Peirce viewed every existing body as a living being. In fact, hylozoism has been a very popular philosophy throughout the ages. It has been stressed more recently by both Whitehead and Teilhard de Chardin. Excuse my French, I don't speak French.
Uh-huh.
The new science of semiotics involves a new way of looking at the world, which was also initiated by Peirce. This generates a new way of thinking, a new way of knowing, and a new way of understanding. It thereby gives us the power and the ability to unify science and phenomenology, thus providing an integrated and a unified methodology for a new way of inquiring. This involves looking at the world from the middle ground, inside the sign, from whence one can look both outward toward all existent bodies of the external world and inward toward all mentating consciousness of the internal world. That is what is normally called the self.
Oh.
This approach is made possible by the bilateral structure of the sign, and we'll look at figure 1 in just a minute, which shows this bilateral structure. Figure 1 of chapter 4, which we looked at last night,
Yeah.
as well as figure 1 of this chapter. It still involves the hylozoic assumption that, in the words of Whitehead, every grain of sand, yea, even every electron, is alive. In this assumption, the new science of semiotics is consistent with virtually all post-Peircean philosophy. The strengths and weaknesses of all three logics can be compared as follows. First, the strengths of Aristotelian logic. 1. The Aristotelian logic has lasted since at least the time of Socrates and possibly before. 2. Aristotelian logic leads to an easy development of science. Relatively easy,
Yes.
that is. 3. Aristotelian logic is easy to understand.
Yeah.
Again, I say relatively easy.
Yes.
4. Aristotelian logic is simple.
Yeah.
Again,
Comparatively
relatively
speaking.
simple. 5. Aristotelian logic is superficially obvious and intuitive, and it really is. And 6. Aristotelian logic explains the reality of individuals, the reality of generals, and the reality of abstractions.
Abstractions.
However, Aristotelian logic has some failures.
Some.
Aristotelian logic violates the Kantian veil.
Oh.
It does not really hold true.
Oh, I see.
Aristotelian logic leaves out all first-person experiences. and it cannot explain the reality of feelings and emotions.
That's a problem we are going to attack.
Right.
So
Right. Now,
I think there is nobody who has solved the problem. You know?
well,
Yeah.
no, let's look at the strengths of phenomenology,
Okay.
phenomenological logic, for a different point of view.
Okay.
The strengths of phenomenological logic, it leads to an easy development of phenomenology. And again, I say relatively easy. It concentrates on first-person experiences.
Yes.
Yeah. And it explains the reality of feelings and emotions. All right? But let's look at its failures, because it actually has more failures than strengths. Phenomenological logic violates the veil of inexpressibility.
That's
so
a
it
Kantian
cannot.
veil.
Huh?
The Kantian veil.
No,
No.
not the Kantian veil. The veil of inexpressibility,
Oh, yeah.
which we might call the Pearson veil.
Oh, Pearson veil. That's the first time I heard of that.
Pearson
veil.
Pearson veil. That is, you cannot express the
Yeah.
feelings of the first person.
You cannot.
You cannot express the objective or the cognitive. You can only express the affective. And it makes science impossible.
Okay.
So we know that it cannot possibly be true. And finally, it cannot explain the reality of individuals, generals, and abstractions, although it does explain the reality of feelings and emotions. Now, let's look at the strengths of Peircean logic. Peircean logic leads to an easy development of semiotics. Well, you would expect it to, because it's based on semiotics. But it also integrates science and phenomenology. It does not require violation of either the Kantian veil or the veil of inexpressibility. It integrates the correspondence, cohesion, and convergence theories of truth. The three major theories of truth, it integrates into a single unified theory of truth.
Yeah.
It explains the reality of both cognitive and affective aspects of the world. It explains all aspects of the self by integrating first person, second person, and third person experiences. However, Peircean logic has some failures. We have to look at those as well.
Oh.
Peircean logic is complex. However, only complex enough to model the reality of nature. Nature itself is very complex,
Yeah.
and in order to understand it, our model must be complex. Peircean logic is difficult to understand, but only because nature is difficult to understand. And finally, Peircean logic requires the development of new mathematics and science, but only because we have not yet developed the required mathematical and scientific tools. And that's what you're going to have to do.
You mentioned the new mathematics, triadic mathematics.
That's right.
We
Triadic
don't have,
mathematics.
We do not have triadic mathematics now.
I'm sorry?
I mean, that is, we do not have such kind of mathematics.
We do not, and we have to develop it.
We'll see.
So you have to be very inventive, but you have to also be able to know how to think mathematically.
Oh, so I have to be a master of mathematics.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
You have to be a master of mathematics, even just to be a run-of-the-mill philosopher of language. So you might as well be a great philosopher of language.
So
Well,
that's a great challenge for me.
Let's look at this term that we've been throwing around. Hylozoism and bilateralism.
Yeah.
What we've been calling, stop.
We're going too fast.
What I've got to
Come
do
down.
is get up here and come down.
Yeah.
Okay, what we have been calling hylozoism in philosophy and bilateralism in semiotics are practically the same thing. In this section, I will show them to be inverses of each other. Hylozoism is the theory that everything in the universe has both an external appearance that is available to all observers and an internal appearance that is available only to the thing itself. Thus, Hylozoism assumes that everything in the universe is alive and conscious and thinking. Bilateralism is the theory that every sign has an immediate and a dynamic structure, a bilateral structure.
Yeah.
All right, where are we?
Aristotle.
There it is. Okay.
Yeah, Aristotle's. Yeah.
Aristotle's Hylozoic philosophy starts at the outside of each thing or noumenal object and works its way in. It assumes that everything is a physical body on the outside and a living being on the inside.
That's good.
If you turn this philosophical approach inside out, you get bilateralism, which was originally used in the USST, that means Universal Sign Structure Theory, for reasons of scientific methodology, but it now finds a philosophical justification. All right, let's stop for a minute and we'll look at these three ways of looking at the world. All right, first we have the old way, Aristotelian viewpoint. The real object is as it really is. This view leads to scientific inquiry.
Yeah.
However, if you notice, here's the Kantian veil, and we cannot pass beyond it.
Yeah.
And the Aristotelian viewpoint is already outside of it.
Yeah.
All right, if we look at the next viewpoint, the Jamesian viewpoint, the phenomenal feeling as actually experienced. This view leads to phenomenological inquiry. Now, let's do this. Okay. This is the inexpressibility of the first person, and it was Pearson that discovered this veil.
Oh.
So just as Kant discovered that you can't go beyond this veil, Peirce discovered that you can't go beyond this veil.
Oh.
And here's the sign in the middle. Then we look at the sign itself. We have this bilateral structure of the sign, so we can stand in the middle between the outside and the inside of the sign. And this leads to the Peircean viewpoint. Semiotic logic points outwardly to an external world. It points outwardly, but never leaves the sign. To an external world as represented by signs, and inwardly, but never going beyond the sign. Inwardly to our phenomenal world as cognition of an external. Where is it? External world.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on. Aristotle believed in the existence of spiritual and non-physical mentalistic dimensions, in addition to the physical dimensions, and was thereby able to conclude that everything was alive. Even stones that were cold, purely physical bodies, when viewed from their outside, were alive and conscious when they viewed as they saw themselves from their insides. Today this is known as Aristotle's theory of Hylozoism.
So, when you say everything is alive,
Yes.
it's kind of metaphor. Otherwise, you have
No.
your definition of alive.
No. Aristotle really meant that everything was alive.
Oh, everything is alive.
Aristotle really thought that every grain of sand was alive.
And also Whitehead, you mentioned that.
Well, not just Aristotle and Whitehead, but every philosopher of the 19th, 20th, and 21st century.
Oh, I see. Oh, I
So
see.
this is the popular viewpoint.
Oh,
And it just happens that Peirce's viewpoint is consistent on this point, although it deviates on almost every other point. There have been many statements of hylozoism down through the ages, mostly in the spirit of Aristotle's analysis. However, it was Pearson's semiotic analysis that marked a revolution in thinking about hylozoism. Since Pearson's analysis, hylozoism has been almost universally adopted, receiving many restatements, including one involving excellent examples by Whitehead, which we just looked at, and another in the form of a universal principle of science by Teilhard de Chardin. However, Pearson's theory of semiotic structure is still the best overall semiotic analysis of hylozoism. Pearson's only known statement using the term hylozoism explicitly came at CP 6.6, where he said, "Is hylozoism an opinion? Is it actual or conceivable rather than a senseless vocable? And if so, what is or what would be that opinion? What is consciousness or mind like? Meaning, is it a single continuum like time and space, which is for different purposes variously broken up by that which it contains? Or is it composed of solid atoms? Or is it more like a fluid?" However, this is enough to show that he was both aware of the problem and interested in solving it. His solution came in his semiotic writings and will show up in his discussions of immediate object and dynamic object. And it turns out that in every single component of the sign, we need to postulate an immediate component and a dynamic component. When Whitehead said that everything in nature was alive, he gave one of his very few examples. He said every grain of sand is alive, yea, even every atom and every electron is a sign, is alive.
In his work of Process and Reality?
Yeah, Process and Reality. I just didn't write the page number down. Teilhard de Chardin framed his statement of hylozoism in the form of a universal scientific principle, now referred to as Teilhard's principle. He said, whatever is present anywhere in the universe to any degree is present everywhere in the universe to some degree. So right here is present consciousness, some little bit of consciousness. And right here is present some little bit of being alive. So everywhere in the universe, everything in the universe has some degree of consciousness, some degree of being alive. Now, it may be very minuscule, so small that you can't measure it, but it's greater than zero. It's there. All right, so a grain of sand has a little bit of consciousness. A frog has more consciousness. A dog has even more consciousness. And they say that dolphins and great apes have even more consciousness.
How about a stone?
A stone, like a grain of sand, has very little bit of consciousness.
You mean a little bit of intelligence?
Greater than zero.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. The reason that this is a statement about hylozoism is because of the simple corollary obtained by using as a minor premise the obvious observation that I am alive and that I am consciousness and I am aware, to obtain the conclusion that the entire universe is to some degree alive, conscious, and aware. This is from the Divine Milieu, which incidentally was never published during his lifetime, but was published the year after he died. He had it already for publication as soon as he was no longer bound by the Pope. Thus, hylozoism is an ancient and honorable theory of philosophy. Bilateralism, on the other hand, is a much newer theory originating in the late 19th century with Pearson's semiotic. Hylozoism and bilateralism are philosophical inverses of each other. It is a turn the sock inside out, or silk stocking approach to philosophy. It is the approach used intuitively by Peirce in his phaneroscopy. Peirce used the word phaneroscopy to refer to what we now call phenomenology.
Oh.
But this was before James and used the word phenomenology.
Oh.
All right. Later, confused with phenomenalism,
Yeah,
but without the formal theory of bilateral sign structure as adopted in the USST. That is, Peirce used bilateral sign structure in creating the immediate and the dynamic components, but he didn't have a formal theory of bilateral sign structure. Phaneroscopy, of course, is just the inverse of phenomenalism. It is bilateralism that justifies and explains Peirce's viewpoint on semiotic inquiry, the new third way. This section will concentrate on an analysis of Peirce's hylozoism as that aspect of his semiotic writings involving bilateralism, and will focus on the distinction between immediate object and dynamic object. However, as brilliant as Peirce's theory of semiotic was, it never extended beyond the status of a taxonomic theory. In particular, Peirce never had a formal nomothetic explanatory theory of semiotics. To his death, Peirce continued to believe that semiotics would never be more than a taxonomic theory. Now that's where Andre and I part company, because he doesn't understand yet that semiotics extends beyond logic.
Oh.
For this reason, the analysis of bilateralism, or Peirce's semiotics of hylozoism, is best carried out within the semiotic paradigm, and in particular using its universal sign structure theory, where the immediate object and the dynamic object carry out their systematic roles within the overall explanatory theory as discussed in Chapter 4. Thus, this section is best summarized as an introduction to Peirce's semiotics of hylozoism and bilateral structure using Pearson's universal sign structure theory. So let's look at USST 2000. We will be using the new science of semiotics and its primary theory of sign structure, the USST 2000, as our tool for analyzing Peirce's hylozoism and its implicit bilateralism. The USST 2000 was fully explained in Chapter 4.
Yeah, we have done last night.
In analyzing Peirce's solution to the problem of hylozoism, we will concentrate on his explication of the immediate object and the dynamic object. For this reason, it will be important to concentrate on the semantic dimension of the USSD 2000, which has three dimensions: syntactic, pragmatic, and semantic. So we're going to concentrate now on the semantic dimension. Note in Figure 2 that the semantic dimension has a bilateral structure consisting of three levels. I have been discussing the interpretation, the meaning, and the usefulness of these three levels of semantic structure at every meeting of the Semiotic Society of America for more than the last 20 years.
Oh.
However, this analysis will concentrate not on the three structural levels, but the bilateral structure, which I take up in the next section. Bilateral structure has been a part of the USST from the very beginning, long before I ever heard of Peirce's immediate components and dynamic components, because it was necessary for solving many of the philosophical paradoxes. especially we'll call it the Lewis Carroll paradox, or the Alice in Wonderland paradox of the Black Knight. How you can talk about something that doesn't exist.
Oh, yeah.
How you can talk about something in a negative way. Bilateral structure has been a part of the USST from the very beginning. It is principle number 2 of the 3 original principles that occurred to me from the very first inkling of the USST. However, it has taken me more than 30 years to begin to see the philosophical implications of this scientific principle. The relation between hylozoism, bilateralism, and the Pearson viewpoint are totally hidden before their discovery, but totally obvious afterwards. And now let's look at figure 2. Structure of the semantic dimension. You see we have 3 structural levels,
Yes.
but we also have a bilateral structure.
Yeah,
And bilateralism allows us to stand inside between the internal structure and the external structure. Now, the Kantian veil is out here, but the Pearson's veil of inexpressibility is in here. So by standing in here, we're inside of both veils. And by using signs instead of reality, we never go beyond either of those veils. And by standing inside of the sign, we can use the sign. The need for bilateral structure. First, used his concepts of immediate object and dynamic object to explicate his solution to the hylozoism problem. But this turns out not to be sufficient for the solution of many other semantic problems. For instance, all the problems mentioned in this subsection require that every semantic level have the same bilateral structure, giving us an immediate ground and a dynamic ground, and an immediate mentellect and a dynamic mentellect, as well as an immediate object and a dynamic object. The bilateral structure is also required to solve many other problems as well. For instance, the problem of talking about non-existent entities without postulating their existence. This is also called Meinong's problem. For instance, Bertrand Russell claimed that the meaning of a sign was what the sign denotes. So if you talk about unicorns, the word unicorn doesn't mean anything unless you say it denotes the object unicorn. All right, so you have to say that unicorns exist in order to say that they don't exist.
But I think
according to Russell and Meinong.
Absolutely, you're right. According to J.S. Leo, I think he's the first person who points out that is the meaning of a term.
Yes.
Is a reference or referent.
Yes. Yes. But he did not try to solve the problem of talking about non-existing objects.
Yes.
So he never saw a single component of meaning as being a problem.
So according to Russell, even a unicorn is not a name, it's not a term, it is a description. I'm sorry.
I find that not very useful.
Yeah.
Meinong's problem, reference to non-existent objects. In some theories of semantics, I don't say all, but some theories, the mention of unicorns in the subject position of example 1, and I'll read example 1, unicorns do not exist, postulates their existence. However, bilateral structure allows the assertion of example 1 without postulating the existence of its subject term. The immediate object allows the cognitive processing of the empty designator unicorn, while the dynamic object points to Carnap's null object. So now we'll talk about information and abstraction generators. This is what I'm going to talk about in Shanghai.
Oh, that's good.
Many parameters related to the external structure of the sign have been called information measures. These are the more empirically interesting properties of the dynamic components of the sign. For this reason, the components of the external sign structure have been called information generators from my dissertation. By an empirical regularity first observed by myself, each and every information generator is also an information abstractor, or what I call an abstraction generator, and vice versa. This begs the question.
How to measure?
Oh dear. Now let's move faster. Alright. Alright, now we'll slow down. This begs the question, how do we measure or capture in some way the interesting properties of the internal experience of the sign? This is the question that phenomenology has attempted to answer, but has not had too much success to date as far as I can see.
Yeah, Husserl hasn't solved the problem.
He has not solved the problem. The external components of the sign are called information generators because they really are dynamic. Each component generates an infinite number of information measures, a few that we know how to use and some less useful than others. But these same components are also abstraction generators because the same information measures mark information that can be abstracted. What can be generated can be abstracted. For instance, the interpretation of a sign generates the time of interpretation, which is useful as an information measure in generative grammar for determining tense. But in painting, the goal of an artist can sometimes be to abstract away all sense of time, as in Renoir's Lady with a Guitar, in which there is absolutely nothing left in the painting to tell you what time it is, what time of day, what time of year. Anything that can be abstracted from a sign is determined by the abstraction generators of the sign, and these abstraction generators are the same component by component as the information generators. We can write this in set theoretic notation by saying that the set of information generators is the same set as the set of abstraction generators, and then we have the equation. For instance, an artist may abstract either time or place from his painting so that the work becomes timeless or universal. All art in any medium is abstract in some sense. Beethoven is interested in what it is to be human, and he answers by saying that one thing about being human is to feel joy, and he proceeds to describe musically the human feeling of joy, not his own feeling of joy, and not my feeling of joy, not a feeling of joy at some happy event, not a feeling of joy at some particular time, nor any particular feeling of joy, but the human feeling of joy, abstracted from all individuality. He abstracts from any particular person's feeling of joy to the timeless, placeless, abstract feeling of joy, human feeling of joy. Thus, all music is abstract, all painting is abstract, all literature is abstract, all sculpture is abstract, and so on and so on. The kind of abstraction discussed by philosophers of science and logic is a particular kind of abstraction, a cognitive kind of abstraction. And thus generalization is obtained by